Hey everybody, it is You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And this week, my first question comes from Gurin Prime, who says, what is the most unpleasant movie you've ever had to watch? I don't mean worst, since bad movies can be enjoyable, and since a higher quality movie might upset someone more than a lower quality one. For example, Man of Steel was more unpleasant for me to watch than Michael Bay's Transformer due to the much higher expectations for the former. No, what I mean is what movie brought you the most agony, least joy to watch? Gods and Generals comes to mind. I mentioned that a few weeks ago when somebody asked me if I had ever walked out on a movie, and I said Gods and Generals was the closest I ever came to walking out in the middle of a movie. It was not enjoyable. I could also say Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. To this day, the only time I have ever watched it all the way through was the first time I went to see it in the theater. The only time I went to see it in the theater. And it was just grueling. There was not one single thing that I liked about it. I thought it was awful. So that would make the list. There was another movie, an independent movie made by a production company in this area called Trilogy of Blood that I found just utterly pointless and ugly and unpleasant. And it was just nothing but gratuitous violence and blood and sex and with no reason to exist other than to titillate the basest instincts of its audience. It was just awful in every conceivable way. So those are three possibilities. Those are three very strong contenders for most unpleasant movie I've ever seen. I mean, movies that are boring, movies that are pointless. I have nothing against sex or violence in movies per se. I love many films that have both of those in abundance, but when it's used for no point, when it's demeaning, when it's gratuitous, when it's sensationalized or glorified in the case of violence, that really, really puts me off. I mean, you really have to be skillful and have to have a point to make and a reason behind what you're doing in order to use elements like that successfully, and lots of movies don't, and the ones that try it and fall on their face and utterly fail tend to be quite unpleasant to watch. The Tranny Atheist. Dear Steve, outside of religious, social indoctrination, what reasons do you think people use to cling onto gender-segregated clothing styles, haircuts, and homophobia in general? Well, religious and social indoctrination covers a pretty wide field. I don't know how much space there is left after we've accounted for those. I would suggest that after a certain point, even things that we have that are parts of our personality that are due to religious or social conditioning, eventually they become ours. Eventually you have a preference, or you have a certain taste, or you have a way of looking at the world that isn't just due to social conditioning. It started as that's where it came from, but now it's yours, and you have to own it, and you have the power to do something about it if it's something bad, or to change it, or to mold it into whatever you want it to be. And I think in the case of, gendered clothing or certain styles of haircut that are associated more with men or more with women, I mean, I think a lot of people, if you're a man, even if you might not believe that, gender identifiable clothing is a good thing, even if you might say to yourself, what, so if a boy wants to wear a dress and a girl wants to wear slacks, like, who fucking cares? Let them dress however they want. You might very truly believe that and think that that's perfectly fine. But you might still prefer on your own, if you're a man, let's say, to wear pants, as opposed to a dress. And it's not just because you are being conditioned to dress that way. You've been conditioned to dress that way your whole life, and now it's just your preference. Now it's just you. And you can change it if you really want to. You can condition yourself to accept or appreciate something else. But I think the reason, other than those forms of conditioning or indoctrination that you mentioned, is just, once you've been conditioned, it's yours. And, honestly, I'm less concerned with how I dress or how other individual people dress. I'm more concerned with how we treat other people who dress in ways that we might consider unusual. People can dress however they want, as far as I'm concerned. My problem is when some folks see a person dressed in a way they consider to be unusual, like say that a man dressed in traditionally women's clothing, and if they take that as a cue to mistreat that person or to judge that person as being defective or unworthy of respect, that's the sort of thing that bothers me a lot more than, well, why don't people just, why do people continue to cling to gender typical clothing? That doesn't really bother me so much. ZZZ Giant Awake. Steve, I had to ask. You and I seem to share a lot of the same social values, but there's something that I feel passionately about that I haven't heard you talk about much, which is the issue of climate change. Have you given the issue much thought? If so, how do you side with it? Are there any actions that you take in accordance with your relevant beliefs with the issue? How do you feel about those that take the opposite stance of yours? What do you think should be done? Thank you much. A tired but alert tall dude, aka Josh. Yeah, I guess I don't talk about climate change all that much, do I? I made a 5 Stupid Things video about climate change denialism a few years ago, and I used to talk about it every winter when I did the riffing on mail call videos. It seemed like as soon as the weather got cold or the first snow would fall, there would be some climate change denier calling into mail call to say, see, it's snowing. Oh, how about this global warming? Some idiot like that. So I've talked about it in passing, but yeah, I guess I've never made it like a focal point of the channel. But I accept the scientific consensus because as a layman, I really feel like I don't have any other choice. I'm not a climate scientist. I am not conceited enough to think that I know better than the overwhelming majority of scientists in the world. And if the overwhelming majority of scientists in the world tell me that the Earth is growing warmer and that human activity is at least partially, if not significantly, responsible for driving that warming, then I feel like I have to accept that. And if the scientific community then discovers in 10 or 15 or 20 years that they had it wrong, and that actually the Earth wasn't getting warmer after all, and hey, don't worry everybody, there's nothing to worry about, then I'll accept that. Because I don't have any expertise to judge whether it's right or wrong. I don't have any training in that field. I am incapable of deciding for myself and making an informed decision about whether the scientific consensus is right or wrong. So I trust the scientific consensus. And that's a point that I hear people doing that a lot. People who think that they know better than the scientists, or who are not scientists themselves, or they know better than they know better than their doctor, or they know better than some other expert who has studied a field that they know absolutely nothing about, but they're convinced that they're right and that person is wrong, or that they're right and all those thousands of people are wrong, or the one guy who agrees with them is right and the thousands of people who disagree with them are wrong. I try not to have that mindset. I try to be humble and accepting of the areas where I am scientifically ignorant, which is a huge, vast area, and to accept the scientific consensus in areas where I am just incapable of making an informed decision. I wish that it was spoken about more seriously in this country. I wish that we, the United States, were doing a lot more to combat climate change and to do our part to counter it. It disappoints me every time we take a little tiny step. Like a few weeks ago when President Obama signed an agreement with China to cap carbon emissions, and it was treated as some sort of political defeat by the right wing in this country, instead of being celebrated as a small but nonetheless necessary step to take serious action against climate change. I think we should be doing much more than we're doing. As for what do I do in my life to reflect my beliefs in climate change, I don't know. I try to turn the lights off when I leave a room. I don't leave these things running when I'm not doing videos. I am somewhat hypocritical. I do drive a pickup truck. When I get a new car at some point, I would like to get something more fuel efficient. But yeah, I guess I don't really do a whole lot. Hugh Jazz. Earlier this year, I got into a debate with a relative over secularism in the country. As this argument progressed, I felt more and more that he didn't understand the word secularism, as he thought it meant my endorsement of it was somehow against religion altogether. He asked me to provide him with an example of a country that has secularist laws that has succeeded in the past. My response was, well, this country. But again, his misunderstanding of the word led him to believe I was unable to provide him with one, and therefore he claimed victory. Admittedly, geography is one of my weak subjects, and I did try to avoid the question, and thus resorted to a more logic-based argument. My position was that, as I see it, individuals who operate on a more atheistic, free-thinking level tend to be more humanitarian and egalitarian in their personal lives. So therefore, a society as a whole operating under these conditions would be more peaceful. Understandingly, this is an argument from personal experience, but was I wrong in my logic? What countries would you have offered as successful secularists?
Well, I don't think you were wrong in your logic. I don't know if it would necessarily work out just perfectly that way in real life. But yeah, I think a society that puts humanism and pluralism and respect for the rights of others, regardless of what group they happen to identify with, is superior to a harshly divided sectarian religious society where, you know, people who aren't members of your church are viewed with suspicion and you know, as enemies and as threats. And boy, thank God we don't have a society like that in the United States, right? Yeah, I think your logic is sound in proposing that. And as for secular countries that have been successful, I mean, there are a bunch of them. I just don't know if any of them would be acceptable to your relative. I mean, I could say that, you know, France is a constitutional secular state. I think Sweden, the Netherlands, Turkey. Turkey has a very long tradition of secularism. Even countries that may not be legally, constitutionally secular, like, say, the United Kingdom, which, you know, England has an official state religion, the Church of England, but functionally, practically speaking, it is a secular state. There is freedom of religion. Same thing for Canada. I think Mexico actually is constitutionally secular. Australia, I think, is constitutionally secular. So there are quite a few and that's just like Western democracies. That's not even talking about, you know, Russia or China or Japan. Japan is constitutionally secular. There are lots and lots and lots of official, constitutionally secular nations in the world that you could point to as secular states. I just don't know if your relative would accept any of them as evidence that a secular state is a good thing or a way of building a successful nation. I mean, Christ, you gave the most obvious example for Americans of all, which is our country, the United States, which is a secular democracy. And if he doesn't accept that as a secular state, or more than that, a successful secular state, I really don't know what you're going to tell him. Tucker Seifert, hey Steve, where do you draw the line between healthy distrust and questioning of the government and conspiracy nutcase? I would say the line lies between when the government has provably done something wrong and when you just maybe have a suspicion that the government has done something wrong. Like, for instance, a healthy skeptic, a reasonable questioner of the government would obviously be very, very troubled and very interested in the recent Senate report on CIA torture. I mean, that's something that our own government has investigated and has reported, and we can see all this evidence collected over many years of just awful abuses, just inexcusable, egregious abuses done by agents of this government. Doing exactly the sort of things that the leaders of the government were telling us the whole time. Oh, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. Don't worry about it. We don't do that. We were doing it quite a bit, as it turns out. So that's the sort of thing that a skeptic or a questioner of the government would look at and would read that report and would be very interested in and would want to question his or her representatives, his or her president, his or her, government officials that they have some line of communication to demand greater transparency, to demand legislative action to prevent this sort of thing from happening again, to demand that the people who were responsible for these abuses be identified and brought to justice and put on trial for their crimes. That's the sort of thing that I think a healthy questioner of the government would be interested in and would want to see happen. It's the sort of thing that I would like to see happen. But a conspiracy theorist is someone who doesn't wait for there to be evidence of actual government wrongdoing. A conspiracy theorist is someone who sees something that just doesn't look right and jumps to the conclusion that the government must have been behind it, or that the government must have had something to do with it, on the basis of some nefarious thing that the government was involved in the past. The conspiracy theorist says, okay, we have evidence that the government has done bad things before, therefore we are justified in suspecting that the government is behind every bad thing that happens from here on out. I think that is the important difference between a healthy questioner of the government and a conspiracy theorist. Shadow Fang, in your It's Who We Are Off Monday ramble, you expressed guilt over locking your car doors as a black man walked by. In my junior year of college, I was walking back to my dorm from a friend's house and saw two black kids ahead of me on my side of the street. Rather than cross the street or go around the block, I continued forward. They assaulted me, and I had to run to an emergency box, an alarm system we had on campus, to get help from campus police. At what point does pragmatism take priority over racial sensitivity? I may have felt like an ass if I had avoided them, but I would have saved myself an ass whooping. In hindsight, I can confidently say I made the wrong choice by not going around them. I suppose the problem is that no one has hindsight in advance. If in the future I come across a similar choice, should I feel white guilt for opting to avoid them? On an emotional level, I get what you're saying, and I certainly get why you feel the way you feel, having had that experience. But I would just ask you a few questions, and I hope that this doesn't seem like I'm poking you or that I'm being disrespectful, but if the boys who assaulted you had been white instead of black, would you feel the instinct to cross the street the next time you saw two white people approaching you on the sidewalk? I mean, maybe you would, but I mean, that's a question I would want to ask. Is it really pragmatism? I mean, and is it really racial sensitivity to not cross the street? It feels like we're treading dangerously close to accusing people who don't cross the street when they see black people approaching of political correctness. And I don't think it's political correctness. I just think it's being rational and it's being reasonable, and it's telling yourself, okay, if I feel an instinct to avoid these people just because they're black, I need to reject that. I don't think that's being racially sensitive or politically correct at all, and I don't think crossing the street to avoid them would be pragmatic. I think it would be giving in to a biased, discriminatory impulse that there's no rational basis for. You can say in hindsight that you made the wrong decision. You can say in hindsight, knowing that you were assaulted, that you made the wrong decision by not avoiding those two guys approaching you. But this to me is the key. You were wrong because they were about to assault you. You weren't wrong because they were black. So as for whether you should feel guilty if you cross the street the next time you see a black guy walking towards you, I don't know. That's on you. I'm not here to judge you for what guilt you feel or don't feel, or what you do or don't do. But and as I said, just based on the experience you had, I can totally understand and sympathize with your emotional reasons for wanting to do that and why you feel that way. But you weren't, when you didn't cross the street or you didn't avoid them that time you were assaulted, in hindsight, you were wrong, but you weren't wrong because they were black. You were wrong because you were assaulted, which you had no way of knowing you were about to be. So I think that, to me, is the key lesson to take from that experience. You weren't wrong because you weren't racist enough, I think, is what I would want to tell you. Harry Ray, hey Steve, in your most recent And Now the Good News, number 114, you repeatedly described the recent Orion rocket launch as unmanned. I found it jarring as I'm used to people using gender-neutral terms like uncrewed. Was this deliberate on your part? What's your take on the idea of replacing gender-specific terms like fireman or policeman with terms like firefighter and police officer? Is getting rid of manned and man-hours going too far? Cheers, Harry. No, it wasn't deliberate on my part. Actually, would you believe I just am not that familiar with the term uncrewed? The term I encounter most of all and that I'm just used to hearing and using to describe that is unmanned. So no, I wasn't intentionally using the gendered term for any purpose at all. I actually think trying to use gender-neutral terms whenever possible is a good thing. And I tried to do it myself. Obviously, I didn't do it in that case. I said unmanned instead of uncrewed. But, I tried to say humanity or humankind instead of mankind. I try to use gender-neutral pronouns. I'll use he or she or they instead of he, which is the more traditional. You sort of traditionally default to the male pronoun. I try to avoid that if I can. So yeah, I think it's a good thing, and I try to do it myself. I'm not super sensitive about it. If I read something or hear someone using a male pronoun when they could just as easily have used a gender-neutral pronoun, I don't really get that upset about it, unless I think they're doing it on purpose to be a dick. It just doesn't bother me that much. But I understand why it bothers some people, and I support the effort to take these gender-neutral terms and get them over to sort of replace all those instances where we would default to a male pronoun instead. I think that's perfectly reasonable. I think that's a good thing. When they changed the opening narration of Star Trek in Star Trek The Next Generation from where no man has gone before to where no one has gone before, I thought that was great. I like it so much better that way. So, I don't know if that's lightning or if that is the crash of angry Trekkies that are still aggrieved over that change, even some 20 years later, 25 years later. Some of them are still really upset about it. Probably the old school guys from the 60s. They like that where no man has gone before. They just can't get their head around where no one has gone before. It's the feminization of Star Trek. What are you going to do? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to answer questions in
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions. Glib and adequate answers.
Sire No. Hey Steve, what did you get me for Christmas? Not a goddamn thing. By the way, I think I may have mispronounced your name, and it's even worse because I'm pretty sure you've told me how to pronounce it in the past, so I apologize for that. That's what I got you for Christmas. I mispronounced your name and I said I was sorry. Kamikaze Sasquatch. Howdy, Steve. I finally got around to watching the new Jurassic World trailer the other day. We have vastly changed what we think dinosaurs look like since 1993, but the images in the trailer look like they're sticking with the looks from the previous movies. Do you think it's more prudent to get the facts right at the expense of visual continuity, or are they justified in presenting an antiquated viewpoint for the sake of that continuity? Actually, I don't think it's for the sake of continuity. Maybe it is, but I would guess that it's just because scientific advancements aside, those images, those types of creatures are still what most people think of when they imagine dinosaurs. I think the old school version of dinosaurs is still what most people imagine, and they made them look that way in the movie as opposed to making them look a little bit more scientifically accurate because they didn't want to disappoint the fans who came in expecting to see what they think of as dinosaurs. That would be my guess. Benjamin Snyder, what did you think of your take on the new Terminator Genesis teaser trailer? I thought it was alright. Look, I'm probably not going to see the movie. I've never been a huge Terminator fan. I really like the first two. I think Terminator and Terminator 2 are really great sci-fi action movies, but I'm probably not going to go to the theater to see Terminator Genesis. I've never seen a Terminator movie in the theater, and I haven't even, the most recent one, I didn't see at all. I didn't see Terminator 3 until it was like on TV. So, it looked okay, but it'll probably be a while before I actually see the movie. Radical Bacon, is Toby Benson actually gay and his hypersexualized macho image a mask he pulls on to protect himself from his own inner truth? No, Toby Benson is, I would say he's not gay only in the sense that his sexuality, and I think Jack McPherson is the same way, is that their sexuality is they will fuck anything that is willing to fuck them. So I don't think you would call that gay. Maybe omnisexual. He is a the term that I've referred to him as is he's a voracious omnisexual. That's what Toby Benson is. Rock and Rob 210. Steve, lightning round question. Any embarrassing stories from when you were younger? If so, what? Peed my pants once in elementary school. I think it went like in first or second grade, something like that. Is that what you wanted? Is that what you wanted? You want me to admit to something embarrassing I did when I was a kid, when I was a little kid, and I didn't know any better, and I'm supposed to be embarrassed about that now as an adult and tell you about it? You asked me for embarrassing personal details, and I'm just supposed to just give them away? I was a child. What was I supposed to do? I had to pee, and I couldn't get up. We had to ask. They made you ask before you could use the bathroom. That would be one. Amar Khan, why are you fucker? Your mother is fucker. Even you are doing sex. Well, no, not at the moment. By the way, to Amar Khan's ESL teacher, I think he needs a little more attention. The Zamzidat, Steve, what's your favorite part about making YouTube videos? Thanks for all you do. Well, I think my favorite part is having the video done and then watching it and seeing that there aren't any mistakes in it. And that I can now upload, getting it done, having it as a finished piece. That's always my favorite part as a writer, too, is having a finished piece. You've written it, it's done, you've read through it, you're satisfied with it. A complete work. To me, that's the most satisfying part. And, getting to know all the people and reading all the comments and interacting with the audience and blah, 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 blah. Ed the Wonder Dog. I'm biased, I admit, but how come you don't own a dog? Oh, I would love to have a dog. I would have a dog in a heartbeat if I felt like I could afford it, both in terms of money and in terms of time. I think when you have a dog, especially a young dog, you really need to spend a lot of time training it and focusing on it and getting it, making it, a well-behaved, well-trained dog. I think that's very important. And I don't know. I don't have a lot of space in this apartment to have a dog. I mean, it's nice for a cat. The cat kind of takes care of herself. I mean, you give her food and water, give her a place to shit, give her love whenever she wants it, and there you go. There's your cat. And but a dog needs a little bit more attention and a little bit more love. And I would love to be able to do that, but I just don't have the space or really the ability to do that right now. But nothing against dogs. I love dogs. I've never met a dog that I didn't like. Adam Firstman, hey Steve, I've noticed that sometimes you give off an intensely, unintentional, scary vibe. Could you please give us your best intensely scary stare that says, okay punk, I just caught you breaking into my house. You thought I was out, but here I am. You want to steal my shit? You need to go through me, fucker. I'm scared just thinking about it. Okay, well, you realize that now that you've asked me to do it, I'm going to be completely incapable of doing it. I mean, you can't just do that shit on cue, but, okay. Let me give this a shot. I'm going to try. I don't know if this is going to work or not, but I'll give this a try, so hang on. Let me try another one. Is that anything? Is that anywhere close to anything? Well, there you go. You asked for it. There it was. That's it for the lightning round. That's it for the questions. Before I leave you for another week, I am going to give you a most excellent shout out. The shout out this week goes to a channel that it's not. I usually give these shout outs to atheist videos, to atheist YouTubers, but this one isn't really that. But it's sort of a science and history based thing, and it is just the most awesome channel. If you're not familiar with it already, I think you're really going to like it, especially if you're a space nerd like me. It's the YouTube channel of Amy Shira Teitel. And many of you may know Amy because she is a host on D News, which has its own YouTube channel, which has like 1 million subscribers. And she's a blogger, and she has a pretty good Twitter following. So you might know her already. But for some reason, her YouTube channel, which is awesome, only has like 5,000 subscribers. So check out Amy Shira Teitel's YouTube channel. She does a series called Vintage Space, which is a series of relatively short 5-6 minute videos for the most part about little pieces of history of space flight, usually manned space flight, going back all the way to the very beginning, like to the Mercury program, all the way up to the Apollo program. It's mostly stuff from the 70s and on back. That's why it's called vintage space. And like for her most recent video, I think one of her most recent videos was taking the recent Orion spacecraft test as a jumping off point and going back to the similar tests that were performed back in the 60s on the Apollo capsule. And it was a really interesting video, a really great piece of American history and space history. And she's great. Her content is great. If you've seen her on D News, usually talking about space-related stuff, then you should check out her own personal YouTube channel. It is awesome. Amy Shira Teitel. It is awesome stuff. Highly, highly recommended. She deserves so many more subs than she has. So, that's it for the show this week. I will be back next week to do this all over again, provided, of course, that you guys ask me some questions. Because in order for this to happen, in order for this magic to take place, you have to ask. So please leave a comment on this video asking me a question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of them as I possibly can. So until then, I'll see you next time, everybody. Take care.